Earlier on, we were talking about go and stop, or stop and go. And the gist was that we need both go and stop. In a very naive way, we would say go is good because go is positive. Go is full speed ahead. Go is progression. And stop doesn't sound good because it sounds like the absence of progression. It sounds like having the wind taken out of our sails or being stopped by a brick wall. So stop is not good, and go sounds great. We can't wait just to take off. And that, when we don't go into it a bit more, we find that that leads to disaster. If you only have green traffic lights, then there's going to be one hell of a car crash, a multiple car crash. So in other words, if all we have is purposeful behavior, we're heading to one really, really awful car crash, assuredly, without any doubt at all. So we might think purposeful behavior is good, but on its own, it's lethal, it's deadly. It has to be tempered with the corresponding or the complementary side of things, which is reflect. So reflect is when we're not doing anything. We're taking information in and we're seeing what our situation is without any preconceptions. So we really are taking a break. And that gives us the opportunity not just to modify our plans, but to drop them entirely if necessary. And that is the life-saving thing. It's very easy for us to confuse reflection mode, where we reflect on what's going on or what's been going on, with optimization. So optimization, in a superficial way, it's similar because we are taking in information about what we're doing. But with optimization, we're taking in information, but we're never dropping our agenda. So we're really looking for information or feedback that will help us to pursue our agenda more effectively. So that's what optimization is all about. Optimization is about upping our game. Maybe we weren't playing a tight enough game, so we're going to improve it. So an example would be if I'm playing golf, so I'm playing away and I'm noticing things that aren't really helping my game very much. So I'm taking on board that information and I'm changing what I'm doing in accordance with it. That isn't stop though, that isn't reflect mode, that's just optimization mode, which is another version of go mode, because I'm never going to stop going. I'm just thinking that I can go in a more efficient way, which is going to bring me to my goal quicker and with less effort. So I'm never letting go of the goal. Optimization is all about improving my ability to get to the goal. So the thing about reflection is that I might be playing a game of golf and I might reflect. I might think, I don't like golf. I don't want to play golf. I never want to play golf again as long as I live. That sounds, in a very superficial way, negative. But it isn't, because that could be the best thing that ever happened to me. Maybe I never liked golf anyway. Maybe I was just getting involved to fit in with whatever social group, whatever the reason. It doesn't make any difference. So that opens the possibility of looking at all the things we do in life, because we're locked into it. And later on, when these things become more difficult, more problematic, we could reflect, is this really what I want to do? Is this really what I want? Or we could just try and do it better. So if there's a problem, I'll try and up my game. I'll try and optimize. And it's very, very unlikely that I'm going to do the other thing, which is letting go. Letting go is such a dramatic thing. And we might think, well, what the hell? Why is letting go so difficult? We can all let go. We all have to let go during the course of the day to things that aren't working out. What's the big deal? It's likely that we will say that we are able to let go of stuff. But this might be true in some small instances, but with anything important, it's not it's not the case at all. What we actually do in life, we start off with assumptions, beliefs, ideas, and we carry on promoting them, optimizing our attempt to actualize that idea, etc., etc. We are in go mode, in other words. And there's something about this because there's a kind of a principle of irreversibility, which means that the more I go down one of these roads, the harder it is to stop. And more than that, the harder it is to even find the resolve to even look at what I'm doing, just on the off chance, because I know on some level that if I do that, I may realize that I'm flogging a dead horse, as they say. And that's an awareness I want to steer clear of. I'd rather keep flogging the horse in the hope that it'll get up to his feet and hopefully win the race for me, even though it's dead. So that might sound stupid, but that's because it is. But we are stupid. That's how we function. We function in a fairly stupid way. In the course of life, if everything works out for us, we'll learn to be less stupid. So that's good. So there's no harm in stupidity if we can learn from it, because stupidity is our starting off point. But this is the problem, because to learn stuff, we have to be able to look at stuff, and we really don't want to look at stuff. Trivial stuff, maybe. How can I optimize my game? Yes, quite possibly. But actually looking at stuff, it's not such a likely thing for us, really. So I could give a few examples just to try and make that a bit more plausible or believable. So these days we're going on about identity an awful lot. So instead of talking about assumptions or beliefs or opinions or theories or whatever that I have and that I keep on building on, we could talk about identity instead. Identity is the same thing. It's all of the above. It's a theory, it's a belief, it's an assumption, etc., etc. That's all of those things. But it's also very close to home, because an identity is me. What is closer to home than me? That's right at home, isn't it? That's super close at home. So what I'm trying to say is, once we put down our roots and we say, this is my identity, kind of stick a flag in the ground and claim it as our identity, which feels great. The process of identification is euphoria generating. It always feels good to identify. It's like, yes, this is me. Having done that, we're loath in the extreme to go back on that, because that identity has become me. So for me to look at that identity, let go of it, is exactly the same, psychologically speaking, as looking at my own death. I'm sacrificing myself, all that I know about myself. So we can say that we can let go of stuff, but can we let go of ourselves? By which I mean, can we let go of the identity that we've assumed and said is us? Now, in actual fact, letting go of an identity isn't that tough, because it's not who we are. It's just a kind of made up game that we're playing. So to let go of it is nothing. So what? It's a made up game. I let go of the made up game, whatever. It's not going to scar me too deeply. But we absolutely don't know that. We don't know that that identity is a made up thing. And it sounds kind of wrong to say that, because it's like, I don't know, somebody could say, my identity isn't a made up thing. How dare you? But all identities are made up things, because an identity is a label. It's a category of thought. It's like saying, if I'm like this, or I have these attributes or characteristics, then this is my identity. It's like nationality. It's like saying I'm Polish or Japanese. It doesn't mean anything. It's a made up game. It's not a real thing. It is a thought. I think to myself, yes, I am this, and then I go along with that. So it's very, very easy to start off like this and to assume an identity, but then there's the irreversibility of it, because I've chosen a path to go down, and it's not a path I can turn around. In practical terms, an awful lot of psychological work is needed for me to see that my identity is merely an arbitrary stance, a narrowing of the possibilities, i.e. that not having identity isn't so great after all, despite the euphoria it gives us in the first instance. So it's like marry in haste and whatever the rest of it is. You marry in haste and you regret at leisure, or whatever the term the saying is. So marrying, what am I marrying? I'm marrying my idea of myself. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm in bed with my idea of myself. And it still seems quite glamorous and exciting, but it isn't really, because it's just an idea. It's got no depth to it. It's got no juice to it. It's nothing. It's just an empty shell. All ideas are empty shells with nothing in it. Ideas are about something, so what they're about is not hollow, but the ideas themselves are hollow because they're about something. So what we have here is an idea that claims to be an actual reality in itself. So that's a hollow thing. Very, very hollow. The ego is hollow. Like Krishnamurti says, we're making a ring around something to defend it, and defending it very, very vigorously and passionately. And all our attention is on the defending. We've drawn the ring and now we're defending it. And because we're looking outwards, we don't see that there's nothing there. There's nothing there to defend, but we're so busy defending that in our minds there is something to defend. And so that's the whole thing about identity. Before I opted to say I am this in that very concrete, literal-minded way, the possibilities open to me were wide indeed, very wide. It's like I can put on any mask I want, any mask at all, or I can exercise the radical freedom of not having to put on a mask. That's pure freedom. It's before I decide, it's before I identify. Now, we don't stick around in that space of pure freedom just to see how rich it is, how rich in possibilities, how awesomely deep it is. Because out of the uncomfortableness of having nothing no hook to hang our hat on. We rush and identify with something, anything, just as long as I've got something to identify with. So there is this awful fear, this thing which is called ontological terror that relates to completely open-ended possibilities. So when I hit upon an identity, I am this is me, then we can have a little story about it and say, yes, this is me, I do this and I do that, and I'm like this and I like this, little narrative about it to wrap it all up. Then straight away that infinitely broad stretch of possibilities is narrowed right down. The rest of it, that's not me. It's got nothing to do with, I'm treasuring this one single possibility. So I've narrowed everything down. And the thing about that is, when I gain the ontological security of narrowing down like that, so that there are no longer all these possibilities in front of me, but only the one, that feels super good. It is like a massive, massive dose of euphoria. But following the euphoria, life gets more and more routine, more and more sterile, more and more pointless, because there's only the one possibility. And the more I push it, the more I try to win out on the basis of this possibility, the further down this dead end or cul-de-sac I get. So the more effort I put into it, the worse it's going to be for me when I finally realise it doesn't lead anywhere and that it's sterile. And to talk lightly about letting go of that identity is to completely misunderstand the nature of the trap that we are in. In our imaginations, we might have that flexibility. In reality, we do not. In reality, we're like on a train that's been rerouted off a cliff, and we're strapped in, and we're padlocked into the seat, and the train's going faster and faster, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's the reality, because we've only got go, we've only got purposefulness, and we're afraid to actually look at what's really going on. So we might ask, well, why does having an identity lock us into this cul-de-sac? Why should it? Why can't there be possibilities for that identity? Which is, of course, what we always assume that there is, that there's lots and lots of possibilities for the identity. It could be a successful identity. It could have everything going for it. And wouldn't that be great? But no matter how successful, in inverted commas, the identity, it's still very, very narrow, and it's still going nowhere. So the so-called success just becomes something to allow us to go further down the path before we realize that we would have been better off not going down that path at all, being spooked or panicked into going down that path. And one way to explain that is to say that things only become real through relatedness. So if I narrow everything down, so I'm just this one identity, which is the same thing as having a rigid belief about the world and narrowing everything down, so it's just this religious belief. It doesn't have to be religious, it could be any sort of belief, but it's a rigid belief, is what I think I said. But it could also be religious, very likely to be religious. Then what happens is, in order to be so sure, in order to have the ontological security of saying it's this but not anything else, this idea is right but all other ideas are wrong, etc., we have to stop looking at the world. Because if we do, we'll discover that it isn't the only way, and that it's not the right way, and that I don't have to be this, and I don't have to have this story attached to me. We discovered that there's actually still a lot of freedom there, but we don't. In order to have a dogmatic, concrete, literal view of ourselves or of the world, we have to make all other ways of looking at the world not exist for ourselves. They're crossed off. It's like being in a totalitarian government where you're not allowed to believe certain things or say certain things. That's just off limit. So this kind of autocratic exclusion of everything apart from the officially sanctified way of doing things happens in all societies because we want to have the ontological security of knowing that this and only this is the right way. And which means that there's no relatedness, because in order to have relatedness, there has to be something different. So if we all get together and form a cult and we all believe the same thing, you could say, well, we're a community, we're relating to each other, but we're not. In order to relate, there has to be something outside of ourselves, outside of our belief structure, something other. And if you look at sects, they don't do that. They don't chill out with other people unless they're trying to convert them, of course, which doesn't really count. They don't enjoy different points of view. They don't want to hear it. We stick with people, and not just cults. That's just an extreme example. We stick with people who see the world the same way we do. And then we say, yeah, I'm discussing things with other people, there's community here, etc. But there isn't. It's only the one idea, it's only the one thing. And we're all clones in a way. We're all generic versions of that one idea. And it's like I'm relating to myself. It's the same thing. But I can't relate to myself because that's not relating. I can only relate to what isn't me. In order to relate, I can't be real unless I can relate with something that isn't me. I can't make a conversation with someone who doesn't believe everything that I believe. And so, when we do go down the road of fixating upon a particular way of seeing the world and a particular way of seeing ourselves, which is called society, we might think society has lots of shades of different things in it, but it isn't, because we're all like clone brothers or clone sisters, really. There's very, very little divergence, very, very little divergence. There can't be, because divergence, the whole point of any social group is to prevent deviance, to prevent divergence. If there's divergence, there's no group. And we all know this. We all know about the pressures and constraints that come about as being in a group, even if we don't quite go into it enough to see how powerful or significant it is. So we end up in a situation where there is no other. There is nothing that disagrees or challenges or conflicts with our habitual way of seeing the world. And this is comfortable. To start off with, it's extremely euphoric. Later on, it becomes merely comfortable. And then when we go further, because it's an addiction we're talking about further down the line, it's not even comfortable. But at that stage, it's far too late for us to get out of it. But there is no reality in it. Reality I will only become real when I let go of all of the stuff in my head, all of the ideas I have about how to improve things, optimize my game, etc., etc., and give up on the whole positive endeavor, because all positive endeavors, trying to make something of myself, end in disaster. For the simple reason that I got it wrong right from the beginning, because I've narrowed myself down right from the beginning. And who we really are isn't narrow. It's actually infinitely broad, but we're afraid of that.